Hey, Jesse, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Brian. So I'm a South African born and bred man. I'm 34 years old. I've been in sales since I was 18. So that's a couple of good years. Started off as a car salesman, selling Mercedes-Benz cars. I then moved over to being an art auctioneer, funny enough, in the States. I worked for a company called Park West Galleries. And that's kind of really where I figured that my passion for sales was. And then my corporate career started at the tender age of, I think, about 21. And yeah, I've been in sales since then, man.
And why sales?
Well, I think at the age of 18, I had the opportunity to go to varsity, but being young and naive, driving a Mercedes-Benz and earning cash off the bat was far more appealing to me than going to varsity. And then I just kind of fell in love with it, man. And it's become almost like an addiction. I've absolutely loved being in sales. In fact, I can't picture myself doing anything else. So it's either selling or running sales teams. But I think for me, it's the satisfaction that you get from the result. And that chase for me is being one that's probably second to none.
And what would you say you're best at in sales?
For me, I think it's building really good rapport. I think for me, most people in sales, it kind of comes second. And for me, I've tried to make it be the forefront of my approach. I think many people in the sales environment forget that the people that you're selling to are real people, and you need to make it relatable. And often my teams in the past have put these guys that they're selling to in terms of decision makers up on pedestals. And I just figured that was the worst calls to make. So I figured, just talk to the person. Like, I mean, they have a bad day. The people that you're selling to, they have kids, they have shitty results, So I think for me, building a really good rapport and then closing, I think that for me is my one of my key strengths is being able to ask for the deal and asking for it at the right time and making sure that we figure out why when there's a no and trying to convert that no into a yes.
And who do you typically sell to in your career?
So, man, geez, I've been in so many different roles in the past, I think, which has kind of led to my success because I've had to chat to so many different decision makers. But I think, for me, mostly C-level executives, whether it be CEOs, MDs, FDs, in the space that I'm in now, I've just launched a new business. So most of them would be your HR directors, chief human resources officers. And then when it comes to your small to medium businesses, I would say mostly your CEO level.
And would you consider yourself a relationship seller?
Absolutely. I think to an extent, I think my biggest strength, like I said, was building a rapport with guys. So I think, relationship has always played a key role in my sales career. But I've also chatted to people that don't want to have that chit chat, and they just want to get down to the point. What are you trying to sell to me, and does it add value, and what the problem solves? But I would say that 80% of my deals close because I have such a good relationship with those clients without even having to get involved in too much chit chat, but really being able to understand the client's point of view and really listen. I think so many people say they listen, but they don't really hear what the decision makers are saying. And I think that's one of the strengths that I have is being able to adjust my pitch and really understand where they're going and almost preempt possible objections. And then in doing that, I feel like I'm more well equipped to see where this conversation is going. So it's not all relationship, but I do believe it plays a big part.
So it sounded more like empathy, kind of putting yourself in their place, trying to see the world through their eyes, what they care about.
Absolutely. 100. Yeah, I think, when I started in my sales career, I always had this rehearsed pitch in my head and felt like I knew what they needed. And sometimes I thought to myself, what they just don't know what they need and that I need to sell that. But I think I had to kind of change my perspective on that and really, exactly like you said, have a little bit of empathy in terms of really understand what their pain points are without sounding too salesy. Like I've had many sales guys call me and try and ask me empathetic questions, but I felt like they were going nowhere with it. And they were just asking it for the sake of asking those questions to follow this sales process that they think will ultimately result in or end in a good result. Where I think, some people have gotten that wrong. So I think, yeah, it's a very fine line.
And do you think you really can be great at sales without empathy?
Depends on what you're selling, I guess. If you're selling a car,
Well,
I mean, I don't know.
well, yeah, in the B2B corporate sales.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really important, unless you have something really good going for you. But I think 9 out of 10 times, as soon as I've gotten my teams to really understand empathy and where the client's coming from, and really trying to probe, because most of the clients that we sell to initially don't want to talk to you, and they just don't want to give you the time of day. So it's about how do you probe to just get them to give you anything. And I actually learned that, I forgot the guy's name, but it was an FBI negotiator, and he had that art called mirroring, where you would like just repeat the last sentence without having to ask questions. And ultimately, then your decision maker would just have verbal diarrhea and give you a little bit more information. And that's when you can really start to identify what the problem is. And that's where you can become empathetic. So to answer your question simply, yes, I think it's a very important part in the sales process.
So you think it's an important part of the sales process?
Yeah, see what you did.
Well, especially when you do
lost
cold
there.
out.
Did you see though?
I
Did
did
you
that,
see though?
yeah.
You lost, yeah.
I did that on purpose. But, especially with cold outreach, because unless they recognize your name, your brand, the product, or the category, they're naturally going to think you're a commercial.
Yeah.
And nobody turns the TV on to hear a commercial.
No, exactly. Right. I mean, I don't want to be sold to. I want to consume more than anything and make the decision myself as to whether to reach out. And I guess that's what makes sales so fun, I guess.
Well, that's it. And if you can talk about what they care about, then you get a little bit of curiosity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, some techniques that I've had. So sometimes it has been really difficult where the guys, don't want to just chat to you. And I think you've also got to know when to walk away and not come across as desperate, or it just might be a shitty time of the day for the decision maker. And I think you've got to know that. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. And how did you develop this skill?
I think from a lot of sales webinars, mostly, where
Really?
I had to learn, man. Yeah, I've done so many different sales training courses, and that it's obviously never been mine. And I think if you try and learn it parrot form and do it by the book, you will probably struggle. So it's being really be able to adopt. But I think having done it for a couple of years, and then also just forcing myself to be in those uncomfortable situations. I read a book, and it's quite absurd, but there was a book called The Game, and it was actually about how guys need to pick up ladies, right? And it was, for me, it was I really associated to sales because it's about a knee-jerk reaction, but you're inciting that reaction. So for example, I walked up to a lady in a bar and I said that you had something out of your nose, and she felt like she was, and she thought she was an absolute rock star and nobody could touch her. And then about 2 hours later, she walked up to me and said, thank you. And I created that where normally I would not have been able, and I just did that out of a test. And by testing different things in sales, I started learning what worked and what didn't work. And I try to then, replicate that in different scenarios and see what those responses would be.
Well, that's it, because that's all based off of neurolinguistics programming. And, but I like your approach where you're experimenting, see if it works, because and the challenge with sales is nothing's going to work 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And everything's going to work 1% of the time.
Exactly. It's a good analogy.
So you have to kind of play with it and experiment and try and find both the science and the art of it.
Yeah. For me, I've always believed that it's more an art than a science. But there are clever techniques that you could call it a science. And I agree with you. And I think one of the important parts about the sales process and figuring out what works and what doesn't work is actually enjoying it as well. I think I've often chatted to my teams and say, try this. And they purely try it because I've said, try it. And I was like, that's not what I mean. I want you to try it and have fun with it. And if the client tells you to piss off, then they tell you to piss off. But, you know, the only way we're going to get really good at that art is if we keep practicing. I kind of try and make sales like learning how to play the guitar. You struggle, then you learn 1 chord, 2 chords, then you start playing a song, and then you start adding a few cool riffs to make it sound a little bit better, and it just gets better and better. And then all of a sudden you've got a symphony and you really enjoy doing what you're doing.
It's exactly that. And that's kind of the great analogy of art and science, because if you took the science of playing a guitar, you'd say, I did that, but it doesn't sound like Jimi Hendrix, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like Brian. So the distinctions are so subtle sometimes, and it requires the idea that I'm not doing it perfect, that there is no perfect, and that I have to get progression, and the feedback is gold, not an insult.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I enjoyed it. And funny enough, I mean, even in objection handling, where finally, when someone just gives me enough objections and I just can't say, well, fine, we're not a fit for you. I often still probe at the end of that. What could we have done better? What didn't you see in terms of, even though I would have probably asked those in a different way in uncovering the objections and trying to handle them, even at the end, just to solidify the fact that this person has made this decision. And I take that feedback on well, and I say, you know, I think when I chat to a CEO or when my team are chatting to a CEO and they've probably had 100 sales calls in a day or whatever it may be, or cold reach, going back to my first point in terms of making the person that you're selling to real, I even get my guys to introduce them, say, hey, I know you hate sales calls. And yes, this is a sales call, but I need to do it because this is what's going to make me, you know, make or break the deal. And they actually often laugh, and it kind of brings them down, and it just makes it humane again, as opposed to, hi, can I speak to Mr. J.D. Bosch? I'm calling from company X. It adds, you know, then I'm almost like, you know, cut the call. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And I hope you got my point there as well.
And how did you develop this mindset? Do you play the guitar or a music instrument or?
Yeah, so I like to say I play the guitar when I've had a few tequilas. And again, in saying that, like, you know, I play a bit, but for me, music has always been a big passion of mine. Even just after hours, it's one word that I turn off from the world, and I enjoy good acoustic or electric guitar solos. And I was sitting, and my wife said to me 2 weeks ago, you should play the guitar more. You absolutely love it. And I struggled to pick up that guitar. I was like, oh man, I've got to do that. And I kind of made the association to my sales team, where I started seeing them disappearing behind their laptops and becoming keyboard jockeys and not picking up the phone. And I was like, that is the exact mentality that I'm trying to get my team away from. Yet I'm doing the same thing with the guitar. Yep. And that's kind of how I made the association. And then obviously with the sound of the songs that you're playing with the guitar and the perfectioning the art. So there were a lot of associations that I'd made with just doing that. It's like getting up and going for a jog. You know, you never want to do it. You're like, well, I mean, some people, once they get good at it, they absolutely love it. But in the initial stages, you don't want to do that.
It is. And I'm a runner. And that first mile, no one ever says this is fun. It's like, oh, my knee hurts. Maybe it's too cold. Maybe I should take today off. But that analogy, because it's so close to sales and how you view it, like if it doesn't sound good, do you blame the guitar?
Yeah. And I personally don't. So I get my team, I say, if you're not getting it right, mates, don't blame the fact that there are lack of leads,
the customer,
don't fact that like it's a bad time of the year, or like, yeah, we have we're too expensive or whatever it may be, because then you might as well cop out now, right? It's about really getting to grips with what you're doing and pushing through, but having fun in doing it. And I think, like you said, that first mile is the worst. And if you can get past that first mile,
right,
and you start seeing small results. I think one of the cool things in my team is we celebrate the small wins. And I think that what sales leaders, perhaps, well, many salespeople see sales leaders lack, is celebrating those small wins, because ultimately, if you feel like you're purely focusing on the end result, there's an entire process that gets to that end result. And if you forget about the now and what you're trying to achieve, and you don't celebrate those ones, like I learned how to play an A chord after not being able to. I was like, yeah, I can play an A chord, my fingers are going there. And then I'm like, oh my God, now I need to get to a B, and that, or like a bar chord or whatever it may be. And it's tough. But I think, that typical cliche saying, trust the process, is so important. And I think if you enjoy that process as well, you trust that if you get these small things, you will ultimately see the results in anything, and for any specific sales.
The number one thing I learned in training salespeople is get positive result as fast as possible. So go easy to hard, not hard to easy.
Yeah.
Because it is a snowball. And until you get that positive result, you're not going to believe it works. Doesn't work in my territory. My rascals are different. That's what I always hear.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, and that's why I've said, it's cool that I've been in so many different industries. I mean, car salesman, art dealer, selling photocopying machines, software as a service. I mean, and you can't. I mean, it is an art, and if you can get it right with any of those things, I guarantee you'll be able to get it right with any other vertical.
And what did you learn when you became a leader? Because it's a whole different job.
So I think when I became a leader, I think because I had gone through all those difficulties, because at the time, and I'm not going to blame poor sales leaders, I just didn't come to terms with a lot of these things as soon as I'd like to have. And I think I've been fortunate enough to, at the tender age of 22, 23, to learn these experiences quite quickly. And I joined a company called Meltwater, which is a massive SaaS company. And they gave me some really good coaching. And I think for me, empathy was important with your team. Understanding that there are individuals in your team, and if you have a blanket approach, you're probably not going to succeed. And I really spent some good solid time with all my team members on a one-to-one basis, and not just chatting about business, but also chatting about what's on their mind, and if there's anything personal that's affecting them, because that may be the one blocker that's really struggling with the team. So I think, listening to my team, I also, what I've learned is that you'll never get it perfect. Like you said, you'll never get it 100%. And I think being an engaging leader is an incredibly important role. If you're listening to their calls, you're listening to how they're handling objections, you're listening to the elevator pitches. Are they too long? Are they too short? Are you hitting the value proposition soon enough? Are you being empathetic? And I think I've learned as a leader that those are really important fundamentals. And if you do that from the grassroots, I believe you'll absolutely win. And then also, that typical old saying, culture. I think it's so important to have a winning culture in sales. I'm not talking about Wolf of Wall Street environments where we need to go nuts, but I do believe that, again, I mean, if I had to break down what my team was about, it would be fun, winners, and respect. We absolutely love to have fun, and we enjoy being around each other, and 80% of our lives were working. We don't want to lose. We need to make sure that on the dying moment, if we are in South Africa and the US are 4 hours behind us and we're missing quota, let's phone the US and see if we can. So we absolutely want to win. And then respect. I believe, having a sharp elbowed environment is detrimental. And I think that having a collective team that respect each other on all levels, social, personal, business. And I think if you get those three things right, you have a winning formula, and then it's just about getting that art right.
And have you ever found a sales rep being successful who isn't competitive?
I mean, I guess the word competitive, like I've had guys that are even like really, they've killed it. And they're introverts, first of all, that very subdued and relaxed or whatever. But they're competitive with themselves in terms of wanting to achieve more and better for themselves. I haven't met a salesperson that isn't money hungry and want to make a lot of money. But I would say I have met team members that are not so competitive, with everybody else, but more with themselves. But most of the time, the team are always trying to outdo each other,
Well,
and just kill it.
that's it, because we compete all day, every day. We compete for their attention. We compete against the alternatives for the money, time, effort. It's nothing but a competition.
Yeah.
And unless you get that emotional attachment to accomplishing something, I don't see success, because you get the, oh, we'll get it tomorrow. Well,
Yeah.
there's got to be something that bugs people.
But on the other side, like I've seen salespeople get too emotionally attached to
Right.
deals
You don't
and
want
not
too
know
much
when to
either.
walk away.
Throwing chairs
Yeah,
and hitting
because
people.
yeah, but not even just that, where they just can't get, like they keep trying to, you know,
Right.
massage the deal, continuously value prop, and they just flog in a dead horse. And sometimes, you know, when you've got to know when to say, right, well, let's move on, because I've seen guys that build incredibly big pipes, and then that's it. And then they know that these are 80%, 90% deals, Jess, they're going to close, and they get way too emotionally attached, and they forget the process, which I was referring to earlier. And I feel like if you get too emotionally attached, it could hinder your performance. But I get what you're saying 100%, because if you're not competitive, you know, then what are you doing?
Yeah, because that brings up judgment, right? They look at a deal and they go, is this winnable? Or am I just holding on to it because I don't want to admit it's not winnable?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the hardest part of being a manager, is kind of helping them develop that judgment.
Yeah.
And what do you look for when you hire reps?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is business intelligence. Do you take a keen interest in business news? And it's not, you know, when I'm just going to hone in on this one a little bit, you know, it really comes down to prospecting and the client that you're selling to. But I think just having a general understanding about business and particular verticals helps you want to engage with the client on a different front, as opposed to saying, hey, I've got something to sell you. So I would say business intelligence, you've got to be able to communicate well and articulate the value proposition. I've seen so many guys waffle and they almost confuse the client. They like get the client to understand, and then they go off another tangent, and they don't know when to stop and just say, okay, that's enough now. I've delivered the value, right? So business intelligence, communication, I'd say drive and stamina go hand in hand, where, you know, you've got to be tenacious and you've got to be able to move and go roll with the punches and keep your head up. Sales is a tough gig. You know, it's fun, but it ain't easy. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it, right? So I think, yeah, drive and stamina. I would say personality and humor. You've got to be relatable. You've got to be exciting. I don't want to hear a dead fish. In fact, it's partly why my company is about not hiring a dead fish. But you know, you need to make sure that you can relate to the guy, that you create a bit of excitement in the person's day that you're selling to, and just in general for your team. And then I think the last thing is a team player. And I think I look at these 5 pillars specifically when I'm hiring teams of sales guys to join my company or my previous roles. And I think if you can get those things right, and you've really got to test these guys when you're looking on these value proposition. Oh, not I keep making association with value proposition, but you know, these I guess characteristics, if you want to call it that, for a lack of a better word, are super important for me. And if I'm missing 1 or 2, I would traditionally wouldn't hire the person.
Yeah. And how do you handle like the resilience? You have a bad day, you have a bad week, a bad month. How do you keep yourself up?
So in terms of keeping myself up, it's actually the hardest part, because, you know, it's me. I'm having the internal battle with myself. So I don't have anyone prepping me up and getting me going and motivated. So I think that's where I have to dig deep as a leader. And, you know, I had a really good manager a couple of years ago, and I was having a bad day, and I almost kind of put it out to the world that I was having a bad day. And for about 2 weeks, from that day, I carried on having a bad day because I just kept putting it out there, because it almost was like a toxic apple, and the sales got worse. And then I had to snap myself out of it and say, like, Jesse, you know, you're the only person that's responsible for these results and nobody else. But I think when it comes to my team, it really boils down to those regular one-to-ones and really uncovering the problem, and then trying to unpack it step by step, and not, you know, taking small bites out of an elephant. With a team, it's really just working and trusting that process again, as opposed to meeting a team member and say, mate, you're really down. You need to step up, make some more calls, you get out there. It's the worst bit of feedback you could give to someone that's underperforming. And I think, whether it's having a beer or a cup of coffee, and just really unpacking it, and then spending time with that rep in a non-top-down approach, a non-micromanaged approach, because I think guys even become even more resistant to accepting feedback, because now they feel like they're just having to do it. But then really just coaching and saying, and putting it in there, like, how would you have done that differently? And asking them to really give them self-critique, because as soon as you have that person that forces you to think about how I could have potentially different, and how I was potentially perceived, or how I could have maybe handled that objection, and then they have the answers, and then they almost start feeling better about themselves without me having to even tell them you should do these things different.
Yeah. How many times could it be solved if they just looked at it from the client's perspective?
Yeah.
What do you think the client's thinking?
Exactly.
Because if you start there, then things start to make sense. We tend to see the world just through our needs instead of what our clients want.
Yeah, absolutely. When I get home from work, I talk all day for a living. It's what I do, right? When I get home, I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to shut off, and I just want to crash and maybe read a book,
Play your guitar,
podcast, or play the guitar. And my wife's like, why don't you want to, like, why does everyone else get the best of you? And I realized in exactly what you're saying now is that I was coming across as someone different, and I was causing a reaction. And how my wife perceives me now, my wife perceives that my work is a lot more important than my home life. And if I had to put myself in her shoes, I would be like, okay, cool, fair point, I understand. And now I've made adjustments to get her super happy again.
And what do you believe about sales to be true that most people would disagree with you on?
It's a good question. I think people may perceive sales as a quick win, and you're a box drop. It's so easy. You just phone the guys, you give them a couple of value propositions, you get a deal and make a ton of cash. And that's furthest from the truth. I think, salespeople do make a lot of money if they do really well. It's the most rewarding role, but I would believe that it's one of the most challenging roles out there. I mean, and that's no discredit to developers and CFOs and finance people, but it's hardcore. And I think anyone that thinks that sales is like selling a car is very mistaken. But I also think that people may think, forget that it is an art and a science, which we referred back to. And I think that really good salespeople, I chatted to a person the other day, and they're like, Jess, you can sell ice to an Eskimo, but you'd never be able to do it to me. And I probed that client, and I tricked them into saying, like something stupid, man, like that they wouldn't normally typically do. And it's an art. And I absolutely take my hat off to salespeople out there, guys that are struggling, guys that are doing incredibly well. It's a tough gig, but it can be really rewarding and a lot of fun in the same breath.
And how would you have done it faster if you had to do it all over again? The learning.
I would have gotten a lot. Yeah, I think for me, prospecting was always like the last thing that I wanted to do. Like, I'd prospect and then I'd stop. I'd build a pipeline of potential people, and then I'd stop. And I would often find myself smoking it for 2 or 3 months, and then having a really dead month or two, and then smoking it again. And I think cadence is so important when it comes to prospecting. If you become religious at prospecting every single day, and also setting benchmarks for yourself, because you start to know what your closing ratios are, how many calls you need to make, who are the typical verticals, and if that's, I think it's proper preparation prevents piss poor performance or something like that. If you just prepare and you just put in, mate, an hour every day, just so that you know what you're going to do. I've seen so many guys come into the office in the morning blind and like, okay, I'm going to phone people now. I take an hour to start getting ready. Then they want to start going and figuring out the client. Then they don't have the right phone number or whatever it may be. And then halfway you've got 3 hours. Then it's lunch break. And I'm like, what is a lunch break, mate? Like, there are no lunch breaks here. Get on with it. And I think, for me, would be the number one thing, is preparation. If I had prepared more frequently, consistently, I think I would have I'd probably be driving a Lambo by this age, but I'm not. And that was my fault. I did not. And I think that's one thing that I try and get into my team, is prepare. If you're just prepared, you know who you're going to call, who you're going to sell to, do you have the decision makers details? So almost all the qualifying criteria up front. You will, even if you have, I've seen so many guys that make 10, 20 times more calls in one day just because they're not prepared. Where if they had prepared, they would make far less calls, but their ratios would be a lot higher.
That's a great point. That's it. Prioritize that list. Who is most likely to be interested? Because you'll get to them first.
Exactly.
Cool. Hey, appreciate your time today. How do people get in touch with you and follow you?
Absolutely. So we're a South African company. I know that you have a big following globally, but check out our website. It's interviewme.tech. We're on all the social media platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. My contact details on our website as well. So if you need to get in touch with us, please feel free to.